In this episode, we're exploring the world of podcast thumbnails, from text size, logo placement, to the art of framing and even transforming your audio episodes into visual delights for your YouTube channel. Your thumbnails are a gateway to your content, so let's make them unforgettable. Tune in.
This is the Podcast in the Rough. Tune in every Friday for new adventurous episodes.
All right, and welcome back to another great episode of the Podcast in the Rough. This is episode 135, and I'm your host, Zebulon Thomas. And today's episode is all about making a lasting first impression on your YouTube channel. Because you know what they say, a picture is worth 1,000 listeners. So stick around, because as I dive into the art of creating podcast thumbnails to help you make them truly stand out. And this is something that I've been going over for the past, I would say, couple weeks now, looking at my thumbnails going, I had this figured out. It was going really good. And then one day I was like, wait a minute. Somehow I've changed something in my text and my thumbnails. Obviously the visual art is amazing. I love that. But my font was too small. And I was like, most people are looking at this on a YouTube channel, on a small thumbnail on a mobile device. And so I had to dive a little deeper and go back to, what it was that I was doing differently and how can I make my thumbnail stand out even more to draw that traffic, the attention, and, get those cold leads, if you will, that cold audience to tap in to my podcast on YouTube. So we're going to dive right in. Now, let's start out with the basics. When it comes to text size, make it readable. Remember, thumbnails are often viewed on smaller screens, as I just said, so go for the bold font and keep it legible. Stay away from those cursive fonts and anything that's just too hard to read. But also, where do you place your podcast logo? That's something that I like to do, is put my logo on my thumbnail just to kind of brand even more. And I want to dive into that because there's a sweet spot for placing your logo on the thumbnail. And there's some areas that you want to stay away from. So ensure that your branding is visible without overshadowing the main image, first and foremost. But I really want to make sure that when you put a logo on your thumbnail, you're not placing it, one, right in the middle. Two, you don't really want to place it up in the upper left because that's usually where you're going to put your text, your title. And you don't want to push it to the far right of the upper right because that's usually, it's going to be overseen by maybe a rounded edge if it's too much in a corner, or it's going to be somewhere covered by the actual title that you write on YouTube. And so that'll go across the top as well. So leave some space there. Now, that leaves us to the bottom left and right. And I toy with this a couple times. I personally like my logo sitting on the lower right. I like how it looks. But the problem with that is a lot of times YouTube is going to put the timestamp of how long the episode is. And it's going to be somewhat transparent, but it's going to cover your logo in the bottom right, at least when you're looking at it before you hit play. Now, on the bottom left, it just doesn't look right to me. It doesn't look appealing, but it's not obstructed in any way. Nothing's going to go there. So again, stay away from the middle because they're going to put the YouTube play button right there, and stay away from the obviously top left and right for the logo at least, and don't put it in the lower right. Unless you don't care that the timestamp's over it, that's fine. Now, many of you want to pull images from your video episodes. So when you're doing that, you can also use that as your thumbnail. So when you're looking for a thumbnail to use from your video podcast as your thumbnail, scrub through that episode as if you're a photographer doing an edit. You're setting up the shot, you're looking for something. What is it you're looking for? You're usually looking for moments that, encapsulate the essence of your episode. So what does that look like? Keep the expressions alive, key visuals, or anything that really tells the story at a glance. If there was a funny moment on your podcast episode and it shows you and your guest or everyone laughing, or if it's just you and maybe you're upset, right? That is the image you want to grab. That is the frame you want to take and use that as your thumbnail, and then put some nice spice around it with the text and the logo and things like that. And maybe even think about zooming in a little bit more. Maybe you're zoomed out a little bit in your podcast and the scene looks good, but you could totally zoom in, and instead of seeing, knees up, you can go like chest up, shoulders, zoom in on the face, whatever that is. Make it big because we want to see the expression. We want to see that. So keep that in mind. Now let's talk about those episodes that started as audio only but found a second life on your YouTube. When creating thumbnails for these, tap into the creative side. Utilize graphics, bold titles, and vibrant colors that represent the tone of your episode. Make it visually compelling even without the aid of video footage. For me, I'm going to be grabbing a lot of yellows, golds, and blacks, maybe some whites in there to grab an image and make it pop. Or if it's more safari theme, I'm going to lean more towards the greens, the adventure, maybe even some desert tone colors, some browns. But that's if you're just using color themes and text and fonts and your logo on the display of the video that plays. You can go a little bit more creative here, of course, if you have the time. And I personally like to create art in every one of my episodes. If you've noticed, if you haven't seen my podcast on YouTube yet, go over and check it out. And you'll see the thumbnails. At the very beginning of season 3, I was starting a whole bunch of animation and it looked amazing. And I really do want to get back to it, but it's time consuming. I could easily spend 12, 15 hours doing an animation, and I'm a little more picky, so I spend even more. But I did have fun doing it, just I couldn't spend that much time on it. So I was like, all right, I'll get down to a still thumbnail, something that doesn't move, and it's very boring to me. But I do realize that on YouTube, still over 90-some%, I know exact statistic, but 90-some% of people that are tuning into podcasts on YouTube still don't actually watch it. They might glance over it a couple times, but they're still not watching it. Unless you have something very entertaining, even if you have video, they're not watching, they're listening. So for me, that's okay. I'm not trying to captivate so much of the video podcast and grab their attention there. But I do have, movement on the screen when it comes to an ad, or I've put some things, because I do film, I'm a filmmaker, ZT Films, that I put some film grain and some, 80s style effects to my thumbnail, so that as you're watching a still image, if there's nothing moving, at least you're getting that grain that's moving, that film grain, some of that noise and some of those 80s effects that might flicker around and just give you some texture, if you will, some nostalgia. And so that's how I am drawing the viewer in a little bit and holding retention throughout the video and giving you something to look at, because I definitely want you to look at something. But the art alone in my episodes is what a lot of people that listen to my podcast enjoy. And that's why in my show notes, I've actually included that you can go and download the official thumbnail art in high resolution. So that's kind of a little added bonus that I put on my blog for my show notes. And because I spent a lot of time on the thumbnail and the graphics, I want it to look cool. So I do take some time and do a lot of Photoshop work. And that's just something I love to do. You don't have to do that. But if you want to go in depth, quality is key. Quality is going to be your boost that you need for your podcast. Definitely make sure you step it up when you can. Now, I want to talk about the thumbnails just a little bit more in depth. When it comes to creating thumbnails for your podcast, especially on YouTube, of course, remember, everyone's looking at a small screen. Also, remember that text size is important, and sometimes you have a long title. And I found this is kind of what triggered me to really do this episode, is I had a long title, and I was like, man, the text I don't like to change the size of the text at all when I'm doing my thumbnails. I try to keep a template, and I work off that template all the time. So I've created the very first template, and the font size looked great. And I have a nice outline trim, and it just looks good around the font. But when I'm starting to add a bigger title, I find myself having to just make some adjustments, and that takes up some time. It's like you can't just type it out. So I used to try to cram all this in to the thumbnail. Now here's my little sweet tip that I figured out that I think it's going to work out really well for a lot of you, including myself. And this is what I'm starting to apply right away. If my title is longer than the template title that I created, something that fits and looks really nice. So think of something that's short and sweet, gives you some room, of course, but it fits really nice as a thumbnail. And it's still big. It doesn't get smaller. It's not over, worded. There's not too much to read. You start there. Anything more than that, save that for the thumbnail that goes along the whole video, that plays the background image. So your thumbnail for the YouTube video is going to be a shorter version of that title. So it might be Success Secrets in Podcasting for the New Year. Well, I'm just going to put Success Secrets in Podcasting. Or maybe just Podcasting Success Secrets. I'm going to change it a little bit. That's okay, because you have your original title that's on YouTube. That's what is searchable. And then you have the thumbnail that is just going to give you just a visual title. And it's going to be around the same thing, maybe abbreviated. And then when they click play and they listen and watch your YouTube video, then you can put the full title on that screen. And it's not going to be covered up. So you do have to do a little bit of work here up front. But once you get it down, it's going to be great. And since we're talking about putting a little bit of work up front, I'm really excited to talk about how this episode is being produced today. I have this Rodecaster Pro. and I really love it. And I thought, I bet I could save myself a lot of time. I can probably cut my editing in half if I could just get the podcast down and then preload all my intros, outros, maybe the sound changes like this right here. That's kind of nice. And even my, promo ads for my podcast community mastermind, which I'll play in a little bit here just so you can hear it. And I put it on these pads that are on the Rodecaster Pro. And I'm loving it, and I'm able to use my script, but I got a lot going on right now. This is overwhelming me. But because obviously if you heard my original edit, I'm cutting. I'm editing the crap out of my episodes because I like to make a really quality cut. And like all this right now, I have some dead air. And it's like, I really want to cut all this out. So we're going to play with this and see how this works. I don't know if I'm going to keep the dead air. I don't know if I'm going to keep half this segment, actually. I'm going to cut a lot out. But it does keep me on my toes. And I'm looking forward to failing forward and just getting more into this episode and making sure that I tighten up my vocabulary. I don't stumble on my script, which I've started to think about the script that I write. I spend a couple days writing out a nice script, and I love it, and it keeps me on track, and I don't have long episodes. Speaking of which, this episode was only supposed to be 6 minutes. But obviously, I want to throw a bunch of stuff in here and talk to you about it. And we're approaching New Year, so I want to talk about the new year. It's coming up. But before I get into that, I want to talk about the script and how I'm just going to start doing an outline. See, I also like to cut out the ums. I really don't say ums a lot, but I do cut them out. But I don't want to stick to a script as much as I want to stick to an outline. So to combine those two and create a little hybrid, what I'm doing is I'm creating a script, and I'm leaving room in the script to lead into somewhat of an outline. So I can go off script and kind of just riff a little bit, like I'm doing right now. I didn't write this out. The problem with this and not having the script pre-written is when I go to do show notes, I want to have it so that you can read the show notes and get a really good idea of what the show's about. But now I have to start including that, Zebulon goes off on a riff here. It goes off script. And it's okay because I think that pulls the viewers in, that pulls the listeners in that are kind of pre-screening the podcast to see what it's about. And they go, wait a minute, I wonder what he really goes into. You got to tune in. So it's kind of a good strategy, something to think about. And again, I'm just learning. I'm learning this. I'm teaching myself a lot of these new, tips and tricks here. I'm spending a little bit of time over the holidays here going, all right, how can I, improve the podcast? How can I refine it? How can I make the editing easier, make less time? I mean, I think I'm doing pretty good. I got this whole thing down to where I'll spend an entire day, if you add it up, writing, recording, editing, producing, mixing and producing the podcast. Some people take a whole week. Okay, but I'm doing this in a day. So I'm getting it done and I'm enjoying it. And I hope you are too. So hopefully you're enjoying how this audio is turning out. And I'm anxious to hear how the mix turns out because, again, I usually mix and master my audio separate from all the sounds and the ads and all the other stuff that I've mixed and mastered, before I do this. And then I put them together. So if you want to know more about my process of mixing and mastering, then you're going to want to tune into this ad right here. Okay, once again, if you would like to join me inside the Podcast Community Mastermind Facebook group, it is absolutely free. All you have to do is go to thepodcastintherough.com/learn. That is thepodcastintherough.com/learn and get inside the group and learn how to podcast from start to success. Now, I should have hit the white pad that I have on my Rodecaster Pro before I did that ad. So it was like whoosh and it went into it. But I didn't do it. I'm learning. This is the very first time. I literally just loaded everything into the Rodecaster Pro and these pads and changed the colors and got ready literally about 10 minutes ago. I haven't had time to really do this at all. So I'm not doing too bad here. I do like this setup and I like the process of this because I'm a big fan of radio. And to me, this is what the big boys do. All right? This is what the pros do. They're in there running these boards like a pro. And they're doing radio, and they're taking phone calls. I mean, they're doing it, and it's pretty impressive. And I want to get this down because this just is going to give me a whole nother skill set, and I'm going to enjoy that. So, again, improving the vocabulary, not fumbling, just being real about it, cutting back on the audio editing, making sure everything's mixed and mastered right, and then knowing how to work the board along with read the script and do 50 million things at the same time. But that's what you're doing. You're learning skill sets, and you're getting better and better and better. Improve every single day. Now, with that being said, we are approaching the new year, 2024. Goodbye, 2023. Good riddance, right? It's been a crazy year. And honestly, I would love your feedback in the group, maybe even underneath this podcast episode on YouTube or leave a comment and review on Apple or Spotify. Let's talk about it, right? Like, how has 2023 been for you? What are the ups and downs? What are you taking into 2024? What kind of, ideas, what things are you letting go of? What are the things you're going to go after? What are the things you're more confident about? What are the things you need to work on? I want you to think about those things as we approach the new year and enter 2024 with a whole new you, right? I really want you to go out there and do the things you want to do. And with that being said, I want you to consider starting your own podcast if you haven't done already. And if you have, then still jump inside my podcast community mastermind group and let's deep dive a little bit. Let's improve on it. Let's share ideas. Let's grow a community together. Let's geek out over podcasting. And if you haven't started that podcast, it's about time. It doesn't have to be crazy. It doesn't have to be what I'm doing right here. I don't want to intimidate you. It doesn't have to be this level. I just kept advancing and buying more microphones. And I was like, oh, what if I could do this? I want that. But at the core, when I started out, episode 1, season 1, the Zebulon Thomas podcast, I was on my phone. And it was so cool just to be on the phone, raw recording, uploading it, amateur style, failing all the way, and building an audience. And man, that was fun. That was something else. And so now I just perfected it. I'm trying to improve the quality. I got my mix and my master down. It's a lot of fun. And I'm telling you right now, don't just start a podcast because you're like, oh, it's going to make me money. Start a podcast because, one, it's going to be fun. It's going to open so many new doors for you. The opportunities are endless with the podcast. It really does give you excuses to go outside your comfort zone. Like, hey, I want to interview this person. How would I do that? Oh, I have this podcast. I have a reason. I have a platform now. I have a voice. I can give them a voice. And you go out there and do it. It's like next level. And if you want to go crazy like I do, then, figure out how to do it where you got your podcast and you can also make it mobile. Go with a Zoom PodTrack P4 and get a SM58 microphone from Shure. Plug that baby in, maybe get 2 of them. And now you got a little portable mixer in the backpack with 2 microphones. You're jumping out, you're setting it up. It's a lot of fun. And if you do it right, and even on that, Zoom PodTrack P4, you have little pads there too, and which I'm going to do this now, they say, is I'm going to go over there and load that up with my intro. I'm going to do the same thing on that. I'm going to get it down. So now I'm just like, I'm doing really good. And so I want you to do really good in 2024. I want you to max out. Another thing that I want to add here, which I'm really excited about. It's another endeavor that I'm doing in 2024 to give back and add massive value and have a lot of fun. I'm also, just create the things that you want to have fun and go do it. Create those businesses that you want to have fun. If you can't join someone else's team, the door's closed or whatever, then okay, be like, whatever. I don't need to be on your team. I'm going to create my own team and I'm going to have even more fun. And I get to run the show, right? You just do that. Like, don't stop. So I say that because I am the keynote of an event coming up and I want to introduce it right here for the first time on the podcast. And it's called the Elevate 360 Challenge. And I would love for you to get inside this event because this is all about discovering your ultimate self. We're giving away so many awesome ideas, strategies, tips, and things that you can apply right now to your life to get 2024 off the ground on the right foot. It's absolutely free, and it only is going to take a couple hours of your time for 3 days. Definitely don't miss this. Go to elevate360challenge.com. That's elevate360challenge.com. I'll put the link in the description below. And go there, register. It's free. Sign up. Check out when the date is. There's a countdown timer and all that stuff. And I'll let you in on a little secret. I've built this entire thing out. I figured, hey, I've done it for a lot of people. I've helped them with major success at this. And I've seen all the pitfalls. I know how to avoid all that. Let's do it for myself. We got this. Let's do it. And on top of that, I know a lot of great, incredible people. So I'm like, let's bring them in. I got keynote speakers. And this thing's going to get bigger and bigger. And it's going to be so much fun. So be part of the first ever event. Show your support. It could be an absolute failure. We don't know. We could have all the technical problems that I'm trying to avoid. And it could happen. It's inevitable. But I'm able to do this because I've done it several times. And this is where I have so much fun. So I want you to have fun. And I want you to check out this event. It's absolutely free. Find out when it is by going to elevate360challenge.com. Sign up, and I hope to see you there. All right. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Podcast in the Rough. Tune in next week for another great episode of the Podcast in the Rough in 2024. Podcast in the Rough.